We are now coming to the lighting. We're now coming to the night in the urban surroundings. And I'm very happy that I can announce my colleague Henckel, Dietrich Henckel from the University of Berlin, and he's talking about urban light spaces and bringing the aspect of light and urban environment.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and it's a real pleasure and honor to be here to talk to you for this final conference on dynamic light. And since I'm an urban scholar and urban researcher and have been involved in light research and light pollution research since 2009, involved in this BMBF project, Loss of the Night, and I'm still on the board, scientific board of the conference organizers for the ALAN, the Artificial Light at Night conferences. The sixth one will be next year in Spain, and call for papers who might be interested will be out soon. What I'm going to do with you, and I'm an urban researcher, I'm talking about urban lightscapes, and as you will see, the take on the topic is also dynamic, because I think urban lightscapes are always dynamic, but it is a broader take than the actual project, which this is the kind of final conference of. What I'm going to present you is some kind of introduction and definition of what I'm talking about, lightscapes. I'm going to categorize artificial light at night. I'm saying a few words on light pollution. You will have an extra presentation this afternoon on that topic. And since urban lightscapes are shaped very much by different actors, I think it is worthwhile to lose some words on the actor side of urban lightscapes. And then I will talk a bit about the dynamics of ALAN, and finally delve a bit into the governing of urban night and urban light. What are urban lightscapes? And lightscapes can be defined as the sum and spatial arrangements of the visible lights in a given area, which is a very generic definition and open up, of course, a lot of perspectives. But lightscapes, urban lightscapes in particular, differ remarkably because they are shaped by different types of everyday practices. And of course, I'm going to talk about these different practices and who is behind these practices. But if you look at different urban lightscapes, relatively little is known about what type of light is used, which is technical aspects in the comparison, in the differences of lightscapes. I mean, when the temporal aspects of lightscapes, I will extend on this a bit, where the aspects of different spatial differences at different levels. Why? What are the purposes the light is installed to, and by whom? Who are the actors behind the different lightscapes? And as I already mentioned, lightscapes are nearly always dynamic in different dimensions. They are temporally different, and especially from the very short temporal aspects, in the instant the light might change at some place from one minute to the next, but also to the very long term with changing technologies of lighting installations. They are spatially very different. I will show examples in a minute, from the very local to regional and to national and international levels. And socially, because of involved actors, regulations, or social strata which are different in different locations. And of course, a great number of other different factors are influencing the variety of lightscapes. From natural and geographical factors, latitude, climate, weather, whether there are water features in cityscapes have a big influence. The technical features, as I mentioned, the technologies, the poles installed, the distances, the color temperatures, and so on and so forth. Of course, the architecture, the used materials, buildings heights, urban morphology, the layout of the streets, the pavements, social factors, urban densities, the distributions of different groups of inhabitants over different quarters, and of course the different types of regulations of the night and the light. How is the night accessed in different cities? How lively is the nocturnal life? This is just to give an expression of the city level pictures taken from space of different cities in the world, New York, Shanghai, Berlin, and London. And you already by these pictures see how different the lightscapes of these cities are. And I want to address one specific point, which is the picture in the left bottom, which is Berlin. And you still see it's less and less so, but in this picture you still see the old border between East and West Germany because of different lighting technologies used in both parts of the city. And this gives you an indication of the change and the dynamic of lightscapes in a longer perspective. I want to show you also the change of the lightscapes of Milan. For the Expo 2015, the city of Milan decided that they wanted to restructure their lighting installation to LED to an extent of 85% for the opening of the Expo, and they were successful in doing so. There was no planning about it. They just hired a private company to do it. I'm not going to extend on that. But you see, but no, it's not so well visible on the screen here. It's better on my computer. The difference in the impression from space, and it might seem that the LED is less bright than the high-pressure sodium lamps have been, but it might be an artifact because the sensors measuring the light are rather blind on the blue spectrum, so measurements from the ground show that Milan has become much brighter. With the student project, we looked at different cities in the world and tried to look at different lightscapes and what are spatial and functional influences on the lightscapes. And I'm not going into detail, but you see that the centers you nearly always see. It depends whether a city has an airport and port. The street layout is playing a big role, and also whether there are water features or not. I'm now trying to categorize light because lightscapes, urban lightscapes are formed by very different types of artificial lighting during the night. I want to stress also the ambiguities and ambivalences of artificial light. Generally, this was indicated already in the introductory lectures, we have a general positive connotation of light and normally a rather negative connotation of darkness, but both light and darkness are necessities for our life. And another point is that light is a positive purpose in itself, but on the other hand, light can be a pollutant. And this is also a difference between other kinds of pollutants. Noise is normally a byproduct, maybe, of transport. And this is not the intention to produce noise, but to transport people. But light is an intention in itself to produce visibility and so on and so forth. And this makes the ambivalence between light as a purpose and a pollutant much more ambivalent than in other kinds of pollutants. Then you have the ambivalence and ambiguity between light poverty and light abundance. We have big zones in our world where light is a luxury good if it is at all available, and in other places, like in our countries, darkness might become a new luxury good. And these ambivalences and ambiguities open up a vast range of conflicts about lighting and darkness, of course. I have to stress, and this is in line with the previous lecture, that darkness is also one aspect of sustainability. And in urban planning, there is still a great neglect of the different aspects of light and darkness in urban planning. And what we are doing is making the case that lighting strategies and the integration of day and night into urban planning has to be fostered and enhanced. Of course, and I indicated that already, there are many types and different types of artificial outdoor lighting shaping the urban lightscapes. Normally we discuss the institutional light, which means systematically introduced and mainly officially governed light, and this is mostly street lighting. But we have very different kinds of other lightings. Mobile functional light, which is the traffic light from moving cars, motorcycles and so on. The mercantile light, shop windows, advertising, screens, staging light, architectural illumination, ritual light, temporal illumination of festival rites. Yesterday we saw some examples in the city. Light from infrastructures, airports, ports, and production sites, and of course, not to forget the individual lighting, lighting coming from private windows, or the illumination of private gardens, which is increasing tremendously in recent years. A few words on light pollution, and it depends on your perspective how you define light pollution, and so you have different types of definitions, and there's of course no generally agreed upon definition of what light pollution is. One could merely say that the concept of light pollution is a concept in the making, as a colleague of mine posed it. You have astronomical light pollution, which is merely sky glow, ecological light pollution, the impact on flora and fauna, I'm not going to extend on that, anthropological light pollution, the impact on humans, and of course we are also discussing aesthetic light pollution, and there are different takes on what is aesthetic lighting and unaesthetic lighting. And then you have absolute and relative definitions. There are scholars, especially from the ecology side of the scientific spectrum, who define any artificial light as a pollutant. And normally we are discussing some kind of relative definition, some anthropogenic definition, light in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong amount, and of the wrong type. You I think everybody knows these kind of presentation of sky glow and the impact, how many people are impacted by sky glow in different countries. And this is one example showing that Saudi Arabia is the country with the highest amount of people impacted by high degrees of sky glow. And you see in this that the European Union and Germany are less exposed at these other countries. The development of the Earth and the history of humankind is a history of day and night, and half of the Earth is always night. And these natural rhythms influence life on Earth, and more than 50% of all animals are nocturnal, especially by invertebrates. And this makes also the discussion about the insects dying at the moment a very important case also for the discussion of light pollution. And since humans are day-active primates, this day-night cycle is also the trigger for our body rhythms, and with installing and brightening up the night, we are disrupting also our natural cycles. And the scales of the impact of light pollution are rather broad, from the local to the transregional. If you can see the light dome from cities by a distance of several hundred kilometers. What are the driving factors for lighting installation and brightening up our urban environments? And why are there, or what kinds of missing breaks are there? The one and most important thing is the positive connotation of light, which I already mentioned. And of course, Prometheus was already mentioned this morning. Artificial light is a tool for many, many purposes. And as we can see, especially in the last decades, we have a process of habituation towards ever more light, and the expectation to ever higher amounts of illuminations are rather pervasive. And we see also arms racing between street lighting and lighting for vehicles. And as a cyclist, I can tell you a lot of blinding lighting of cycles, which is increasingly happening. We have staging of buildings, screens, shops and restaurants, which try to trigger attention with ever more bright blinking lights and so on and so forth. And the number of Festival of Lights is all over increasing. And one special thing with technological progress is also that's what economists call rebound effects, that higher efficiency and declining prices not reduce the use of this, whatever it might be, in this case light, does not reduce the consumption of light, but increase the consumption at least disproportionately. And of course, lighting is a strong industry which its own economic interests at stake. And as we can see, there is at least limited regulations and great differences in regulations between countries. And I think there is also a presentation on regulation. As I indicated, behind urban lightscapes, there is a high number of actors relevant. Normally we talk about the state or the local authorities providing public lighting, street lighting. But of course the police is an actor fighting for higher illumination. Normally there is one city in the US where it's Square, which is criminal hotspot, where the police has a switch to brighten up the place if they think it's appropriate to do so. Security activists, commerce, the lighting industry, property owners to stage their buildings, environmental activists on the contrary, astronomers on the contrary, artists, lighting engineers are having their own agendas, and so on and so forth. It's not an exhaustive enumeration of the actors, but this makes the complexity, I think, obvious, whether you have single or multiple actors or switches. And the point is that the official light, the street lighting, there's normally only one actor behind one switch or a few switches. But all other lighting is different, and you have different actors depending on the lighting functions. And every other, as I said, every other lighting besides street lighting is characterized by a lot of switches and actors. And then, of course, you have contradicting goals to enhance visibility, to foster security, to stage building, to attract attention, and so on. On the other hand, you have the goal to reduce light, to enhance sustainability, and to preserve darkness. I will extend on that a bit in a minute. Now I want to switch a bit to the changing lightscapes and some aspects of dynamics of lightscapes. This is another presentation of satellite images of European metropolises, which Alexandro Sanchez put together. It is the same camera exposure, same time, and so on and so forth, so they are comparable. And you see a very different brightness of the cities seen from space, Madrid being the brightest, and Berlin by far the darkest. And Berliners are used to it, and this is also a kind of habituation. I have a colleague from Milan, a very bright city, which I work together a lot, and she finds Berlin extremely dark and scary because she is used to well other amounts of light. This is a spatial comparison. This is a comparison at 3 different locations in Berlin, where we did time-lapse studies at Alexanderplatz, Potsdamer Platz, and Hackischer Markt. 3 very bright locations, squares in Berlin. And we took time-lapses over the whole course of the night at these 3, and I show you some stills at 11:30 and 3 o'clock. And if you see the rather heavy change in the lighting installation, the hotel in the left is switched off, the television tower is switched off, and so on and so forth. The interesting thing is that this light dome, which is a cinema, is never switched off over the whole course of the night. And from the bottom of the street, you cannot see this light dome at all, only from above. So there is a question what this is for. These are photos above taken myself from Jinmao Tower in Pudong. And after 10 o'clock, all the lights are switched off. The staging lights, the screens, and so on. It's getting much darker. And this is a time-lapse video from the internet showing Pudong from a boat after the switch off. This is a regulation in Shanghai to switch off all these lights after 10 o'clock or sometimes a bit later. And also Beijing has this kind of very strict regulation. Lighting regulation, I think these changing lightscapes give a clue about possible anchors for regulating light. And these changing lightscapes between cities give these clues between locations within one city and even over the course of the night. And I think that this could, it is I think, a strong thesis, but I think it's also an indication for the possibilities of even rather strong regulation. Governing the night and light, the urban light, is a very complex task because you have serve contradicting goals, as I already indicated. You have to provide light and darkness, and you have to, this is the lighting conflict, and for the night, you have to provide access to the night, and you have to protect the night. And therefore, you have issues to deal with. You have to deal with strategies for prioritizing and mitigation of conflicts, and this makes compromises inevitable. This governance task is very complex because you have to take into account facts and perception, because lighting is also an interpretation of what you see, how you feel about it. And it's not only a question of measuring lux and color temperature. So you have to take into account facts and objective and subjective actors. You have to take into account all types of lighting which are indicated. And you have these different kinds of diverging and contradicting goals regarding lighting itself: visibility, security, technology, design, energy saving, lighting impacts, ecological preservation, sky visibility, health and well-being, heritage, atmosphere. Probably many of you know the conflicts about the refurbishment of lighting in Rome, from the yellowish, calm, cozy lighting to cold white LED lighting. Therefore, urban light planning requires, among others, coordination between public and private actors, which is a severe shortcoming at the moment, in my view. The provision of two contradicting public goods in an economic perspective: access to the night and protection of the night. And the provision of public goods in economic theory always make public intervention necessary, and is a foundation for public intervention and regulation. And if you have even contradicting public goods, the need for regulation becomes even more pronounced. I will not extend on regulation because I think there's also talk on this. You have very different kinds of regulation, hard or soft laws, recommendation, guidelines, norms, standards, agreements, certifications like the IDA or lighting master plans, which many cities by now have, which are only binding themselves. I come to my concluding remarks. In my view, artificial light at night is always dynamic in very different dimensions. Alan is highly ambivalent because you serve purposes, positive purposes with lighting, and lighting is artificial lighting is also a pollutant with severe negative impacts, and the negative impacts are becoming more and more aware. You have contradicting goals of actors, because every actor has a different take on the problem and different perspectives. Therefore, light is contentious and conflictual. The interrelations between artificial lighting, place, temporality are highly complex, all the more as the nightscape changes throughout the night. And the nightscapes, how populated are different areas in the city, and how do we have to serve for these different kinds of populations throughout the night. As I mentioned, and I would like to stress this again, governing the night means the provision of two contradictory public goods, the access to the night and the protection of the night. And this means, in terms of lighting, provision of light and provision of darkness. And this, in my view, shows the inevitability of regulation and compromises. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah.